Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Elevate Youth California Youth Substance Use Disorder Prevention Program Cohort 6 Standard Track Request for Applications Review Webinar. This call will cover the overview of the request for applications. So we also synonymously call this a proposers webinar. Here to go over the request for applications. Please note that all of the material that we are sharing is included in the request for applications that's located on the Elevate Youth California website, but gives us an opportunity to go ahead and answer any questions in real time and walk through the materials for folks who prefer this style. So we'll go to the next slide. Just a brief agenda. We'll go ahead and do welcomes, which I know a number of folks have already been dropping in good mornings in the chat, and then we'll have an opportunity to meet our team as well as the DHCS team who oversees this funding opportunity and the Elevate Youth California. And then we'll jump in into the program background, the funding opportunity. We'll share more details about how to apply and also how to be competitive. Throughout the webinar, we'll have opportunities to go ahead and ask questions. You're more than welcome to drop them in the chat. We do ask that because just given the sheer number of folks who are on, given that there's over 200 and almost close to 250 folks who are on this webinar, that we do ask that you submit your questions into the Q&A option. So if you go at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, there is a Q&A button, and so you can go ahead and drop your questions there. Folks are welcome to drop them in the chat. We'll try our best not to miss them, but that is the best way. The Q&A option is the best way to make sure your questions do get answered, and we can actually answer them in real time as well as respond in that option. And I think someone has already dropped in a question, so great. I will note that we're going to try to keep questions related to the specific sections as best as possible, so that way we can try our best to get through the materials and knowing that many of the questions might be answered in that respective session. But feel free to drop in your questions just so that way you don't forget them as well. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So here is our Elevate Youth California team at the center. Our day-to-day team consists of Matt Cervantes, who's our Associate Vice President of Programs here at the center, who's not with us today. My name is Pulvinder Kaur. I serve as a Senior Program Officer, and we're just going to go ahead and do introductions for our entire team. I'll pass it over to Shira.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shira Murray, and I serve as a program officer with the Elevate Youth California program team. Thank you all for being here today. I'll go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Travis.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Travis Wells. I'm a senior program associate here at the EYC day-to-day team, and I'll pass it over to Antonia.
Good morning, everyone. Antonia Gonzalez, pronouns they, them. Happy to be here with everyone today to learn about this new funding. I'll pass it over to Gerald.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Gerald here, program associate, and passing it to Evelyn.
Good morning, everyone. Also happy to be here. My name is Evelyn Gonzalez. I'm the program assistant for EYC. Back to you, Pulvinder.
Thanks so much. And that's our day-to-day team here at the center. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over. We're going to go to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to our partners over at the Department of Healthcare Services. Jessica?
Thanks, Palvinder. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Guerra, and I am the section chief of the Program and Policy section at the Department of Healthcare Services. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Stephanie.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie List. I am the unit chief over the Prop 64 program unit, and happy to see everyone here.
Thank you so much. And if we go to actually the next slide, and I think with that we'll keep it over at Jessica with you, I think, right?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and just go over a couple of slides. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Jessica Guerra. I'm the section chief, and my goal today is just to give a short program overview of the Elevate Youth California program, to go over how it's funded, and then also to talk about our mission and vision. Elevate Youth California is a project of the center at the Sierra Health Foundation, and they are under contract with our department, the Department of Healthcare Services. It's really important to note that and to recognize that Elevate Youth California is funded by Prop 64. And this revenue stream specifically funds Elevate Youth California. On November 8th, 2016, Prop 64 was passed by voters, allowing adults 21 years or older to possess and use marijuana for recreational purposes. Prop 64 created two new taxes, the revenues of which are deposited into the California Cannabis Tax Fund, and current law allocates, after other specified disbursements, 60% of the remaining California Cannabis Tax Fund be deposited into the Youth Education Prevention, Early Intervention, and Treatment account. Funds are then dispersed to the Department of Healthcare Services, specifically for youth programs aimed to educate and prevent harm for substance use disorder. This program specifically focuses on communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. It's really exciting to see so many people on today's webinar, and some of you guys are new and some of you guys are returning. We're really excited about this new round of funding. And so I just want to say that if you're new to the Elevate Youth California program, first, we hope that you'll consider applying and look forward to learning more about your organization through the application. If you're a returning grantee, you'll see similarities between this RFA and prior RFAs. But ultimately, the mission of Elevate Youth California will remain the same. And with that said, the mission is Elevate Youth California is a statewide program addressing substance use disorder by investing in youth leadership and civic engagement for youth of color and 2S LGBTQ+ youth ages 12 to 26 living in communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And the vision is that all California youth should have equitable opportunities to be leaders and change agents in their community. As I mentioned, this is our round 6. We're excited to continue growing, and we're incredibly thankful for our partnership with the center. We could not do this work without them. With that said, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Palvinder.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Grateful for the partnership as well. We'll go to the next slide. As Jessica mentioned, this contract is administered through the Center at Sierra Health Foundation, and just a little bit of brief background from our end. The center was launched in 2012 and really is the nonprofit arm for the Sierra Health Foundation located in Sacramento, and really thinking about how do we bring people, ideas, and infrastructure together to create greater positive change here in the state of California. For those who may know the foundation a bit, the foundation has specific 26 county focus, but the center does work throughout the state. We are committed and dedicated to health and racial equity, and as Jessica mentioned, we are the managing entity for the Elevate Youth California program, and this is again through the partnership with the California Department of Healthcare Services. Really grateful for this, and this is our 6th round of funding and implementation. We've had many more cohorts administered because we typically have more than one cohort per round, but just really grateful for the partnership and to be the leading entity of this work. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. As Jessica mentioned, some of the mission and vision, really just wanting to highlight, and you'll hear some of these phrases mentioned a few times, just to be able to emphasize. And when we really think about Elevate Youth California, it is grounded in social justice youth development, really looking to support a network of organizations across the state. We currently fund 283 organizations who are doing work across the state for this program. And thinking about, how do we ensure prevention, education, and early intervention startup activities for youth substance use disorder. So how are we preventing, creating greater education and intervening early on to prevent substance use disorder, and really looking at that through a social justice youth development lens, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. And, there's priority focus of low income, urban, and rural areas throughout California. And we do this through greater long-term change of impacting policy systems and environmental change that is youth-led. Next slide, please. This is our current list. As I mentioned, we have currently 283 active partners across the state of California. Our first awards were made in 2020, but that first cohort has now ended their previous awards. And as Jessica mentioned, many of our partners do apply again. So there might be folks who have current active awards that are ending this year who are eligible to apply. and we'll go more into eligibility later. But this is our current slate of active partners in the state. I do want to mention that you can find this map on our, not our active map, but you can find our all funded partner map on the website. And we'll go to the next slide, and there's some additional information that you can also find on our website. So if you go to the program impact tab, you can see all of the cohorts that are active. You can see the cohorts 1 through 5 that are well, currently 3, 4, and 5 for standard track that are active, and then our capacity building cohort 2 and 3 partners that are currently active as well. It is not included on the slides, but if you go to the program impact tab or sort of menu bar, there is also a program filter. So if you're curious about the partners who are in a particular region, maybe in a particular county, you can go ahead and utilize that program filter to go select the number or select the partners who are doing work. So as you click on different filters, it'll show you sort of narrow in from the full slate of partners and the awards that have been made. We'll go to the next slide. And this is already one of the questions that sort of is coming up for folks, but we do anticipate at this point 2 funding rounds for round 6. However, I will mention a caveat at the very end. So currently we're talking about our standard track funding award. This is for 36 months for 3 years, up to $1 million can be requested. And we did release the RFA in August. And again, the focus of the standard track is really around youth-led policy system and environmental change. That's through youth civic engagement, mentorship, and peer-led support. And so we'll dive into more of those components in just a little bit. We also do anticipate currently having a capacity building track. That'll be 2.5 years up to $400,000. We may potentially release this in January, February, but early 2025. And, we wanted to just note that the EYC funding is subject to change, and it's really around the tax revenue actuals, and those deposits that are being made into the Department of Healthcare Services account. And so we did want to note that the capacity track will be funded based on the tax revenue settled amount. And so last year we did not have that funding opportunity given the settled amount as well as the delays that occurred. And so we just wanted to go ahead and mention that. So if you are if you are an entity that's considering the capacity building track, you would not be ineligible to apply for that. We do encourage you to apply for the standard track, knowing that there may be, while we don't anticipate it, you never know what happens. So we just wanted to go ahead and make sure that we mention that. But typically we do anticipate having both of those tracks, and we'll have more information about that and can answer any questions that may come up for folks. But throughout this, over the next just a little bit less than an hour and a half, we'll be talking through the standard track, which is the current RFA that is open right now. We'll go to the next slide. And so with that, we're just going to go ahead and dive right into the funding opportunity and go into an overview. Again, this is a very high overview. We're not going to touch on all of the aspects of what's listed in the RFA because that would take us a while. It is a 25, I want to say, plus page document. And so we'll kind of have cover the key points on this webinar. So next slide. And I just also wanted to start off with saying that we do encourage you to go through the complete request for applications. I cannot emphasize this enough. Again, it is a somewhat lengthy of a document, but some of those sections are around eligibility and selection criteria. It just gives you a little bit more details into what we're looking for. However, I do encourage you to look at the first half of it and before you start your application. It's really important to also highlight the glossary. We have a number of key terms here, especially because folks can define some of these terms in different ways, and we wanted to make sure that we had a foundational understanding of what we're talking about when we think about even prevention. So for some folks, prevention might look differently. For us here at the center and for the Elevate Youth California program, we really are thinking about a wide sort of approach to prevention. You know, what are the risk factors that the young people that you're working with, what are those risk factors that they're facing? What are the protective factors working with those young people? And how do you reinforce those protective factors, ensure that they're in place and they stay in place? And how are the risk factors being addressed? So prevention is not just about substance use education. It is also about instilling and ensuring that both protective factors are reinforced and risk factors are addressed as well. So, you know, we define harm reduction as well as substance use disorder, and then also policy systems and environmental change. That's another one that's really come up, as well as social justice youth development for many of our applicants. And so we do encourage you to review the glossary in the RFA. And, you know, I'll just go ahead and highlight specifically the policy systems and environmental change. So really looking at that long-term sustainable change. And so how do we modify, or what is that sort of way of modifying larger structures to make healthy choices that are practical and available to all community members? So, you know, just really thinking about, as we change policies, systems, environments, communities can really look to tackle health issues at the population level. So, you know, how do we get beyond the individual, the families that are being served, but really at that population level to greater sustainable change? And so we will mention this throughout the RFA, but the specific policy goal that an organization is applying for or proposing is determined by the organization, and it is youth-led. So, you know, we want to make sure that young people are driving this change. And so as you think about your proposal and your application and the programmatic activities that encompass your application, really thinking about, you know, how are young people trained, provided the resources, the skill sets, the knowledge to be able to promote population level impacts, specifically with a policy, systems, or environmental change goal. The other component that I'll go ahead and dive into a little bit is the social justice youth development framework. This really expands on the concept of positive youth development framework. So many of those on this call may be a little bit more familiar with the positive youth development framework, really addressing social factors, including racism, xenophobia, other racial inequities that youth face as they develop. And being able to recognize that those systemic forces and supports young people in developing the skills and knowledge. So as young people lead the policy systems and environmental change work that's happening, you know, understanding that young people are developing those skills and that knowledge to transform the systems that influence their lives, their neighborhoods, and the broader community. So really wanting to highlight those two components. You know, we do receive, and over the course of the Elevate Youth California program, we receive many applications that include a policy goal, that include, you know, training for young people. But we want to emphasize that the policy systems and environmental change work should be driven by young people and led by the young people themselves between the ages of 12 to 26. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide because I think that covers those sort of components. And so as we think about substance use disorder prevention, you know, again, as I mentioned, promoting healthy behaviors, reducing risks, and building protective factors. And then harm reduction, really thinking about reducing at-risk, moderate, and high-risk behaviors. You know, we want to really shift away from zero tolerance policies, you know, abstinence only programs. You know, the reality is that young people who, because the program encompasses young people between the ages of 12 to 26, some of those young people are legally able to engage in particular substances. And so how do we create environments where we're reducing at-risk, moderate, and high-risk behaviors? How do we provide young people with that skill set and that knowledge around substance use disorder prevention? And so next slide. And this is just covering a bit more about what I said around social justice youth development. I want to focus that the Elevate Youth California program is focused on communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So thinking about Indigenous and Native communities, Black and Brown communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And so, you know, when we're thinking about this, we have to be very intentional about those communities, two-spirited LGBTQ plus communities that are at higher risk of engaging in substances, systems impacted young people as well. And so really want to highlight that the awards that are selected would prioritize those communities. And in the narrative questions, there's an opportunity for you to go ahead and bring those the communities and the population of focus that you work with into to describe that as well. And so again, some of those examples are, I'll focus a little bit on the examples, is really, you know, youth-led civic engagement, student civic engagement, campaigns to address a community or school concern even, and efforts to change a social condition through public policy. So, you know, really leaning into what, you know, and I really invite applicants to think about, you know, when you think about the young people that you're working with, what are those most relevant policies, environmental conditions, social conditions that could change, that would really benefit young people and prevent substance use disorder. So really just, you know, encourage applicants to really think about that, you know, and we'll share more about the work plan. And if you're looking to be able to incorporate youth voice and ensuring young people are driving that change or determining that policy, Shira will share a little bit more as we dive deeper. Next slide, please. And so our guiding value is really important to be able to share sort of why we do this work as well. And so we really want to invest in youth empowerment, leadership, and development. Much of this work could be focused on, you know, adults doing this work, being able to create that, but really wanting to make sure that we're creating, you know, that pipeline of young people to be able to lead change for tomorrow as well, and the next generation of leaders. And we want to make sure that we're implementing programs through the cultural lens of the impacted community. We really look at our organizations, you know, do they represent and reflect the communities they're working with, and supporting, you know, do they have some of the same lived experience as those young people? Are we tying in, you know, linguistically and culturally appropriate programs and components to the work as well? And then really that component around the policy systems and environmental change. So how are we creating at the sort of greater level, at the population level, greater change as well? And so this table here, or this sort of image, sort of shows at each of those levels, at the individual, interpersonal, community, and societal structural level, what might that look like. And so, you know, as you are thinking about working with just the young people, thinking about the folks who are interpersonal to them, you know, and those experiences that they've had, the families, friends, social connections that they've had in those experiences, the broader community as well. And then, you know, when you're determining the policy goal, really thinking about that societal and structural level as well. Our goal is to really think about, you know, at each level of this ecosystem, what change and what are we factoring in to program design, as well as what are we thinking about changing as well. Next slide. And so our youth prevention program scope, so really again, I'll dive into, and there's already a question about this, so I'll answer this right now. We're looking out for applications from community-based organizations to 501c3 organizations, tribal organizations, and this can include 638s and urban clinics, as well as county behavioral health organizations. And for county behavioral health organizations, you do have to be the lead implementer of your prevention program. And so we can share more, and the RFA has more details about that. As I mentioned, we really are looking to partner with organizations who do integrate cultural and linguistically appropriate prevention, outreach, and education projects. And the project period will be from January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2027. So again, that 3-year mark for the program. Next slide. And we're also happy to share that we do have the Elevate Youth California logic model that's been linked in the RFA as well. So really do encourage applicants to look at this. So, you know, we've made a few assumptions into the program. So for those who are familiar with the logic model, this will make a lot of sense. And to those who are not, we'll walk through it a bit. You know, as I mentioned, the program does look to focus on communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, and that includes Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color and low-income communities. The programs and as of some of the last data that we have, it's over 93% of the young people the funded partners are able to reach or that have reached have been youth of color. So we are happy to share that our funded partners are able to reach those communities and those young people that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And, you know, we're really thinking about the young people and two-spirited LGBTQ plus youth across California are facing persistent challenges due to systematic and systemic underinvestment in their communities. And, you know, ultimately, if you hopefully caught on from this, you know, youth are leaders, they're decision makers, and they're drivers for community change. And we're really looking to amplify that and lift that through this program. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll try to go a little bit quicker on this one. And so you may need to pull this out onto the RFA. So I do apologize if it's a little bit small on your screen, but I think Diz has some options to zoom in on your end. But do really encourage folks to look at this RFA. And so from our end, and I actually have to make my screen wider on this, but some of the inputs, you know, really thinking about the funding, the evidence-based, innovative, and community defined prevention practice that organizations are implementing, as well as the cohort-based support. So the center does provide technical assistance. We provide supports around the focus areas, as well as around submitting your deliverables. And then what are those activities? So this is really the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes, and the long-term impacts are really from the communities themselves and from the funded partners and what they're engaging in. So really thinking about civic engagement related to substance use issues, leadership development. So as we're thinking about youth leading those programs, you know, a key component has to be leadership development. How are young people being trained and provided the skill set to be able to lead that policy goal as well? Mentorship, relationship building between peers and adults, and this can be either or both. And thinking about, you know, as your program is thinking about mentorship or relationship building, is it across peers? Is it with adults and adult mentors? But really thinking about those positive relationships that are being built throughout the award period too. And then substance use prevention, education services, and support. So really thinking about all of the intervention, the outreach, the training, you know, that's happening, as well as providing or expanding access to resources, supports, or services. And one of the components that we do ask about is in the application is also about, you know, the linkages that are made. So while the Elevate Youth California program does not provide treatment, we do encourage for resources and linkages to be made. So how are you connecting young people either to different services within your own organization or with other partners that you might work with? And then I'm not going to dive into the capacity building activities for right now, but, you know, we do provide technical assistance and support training, both one-on-one as well as through larger webinars as well. And so that's also provided by the center. And so some of the outputs, and you can kind of get some of this from your application as well. So some of the number of youth that are going to be participating in civic engagement program activities that'll lead cultural or community program activities, you know, connecting to a formal mentor or supportive relationship with their peers. I'm not going to go into all of it, but our ultimate hope is that there's increased participation of youth in the EYC programming, you know, increasing knowledge and civic engagement, policymaking processes, and public officials among youth, really thinking about increasing the number of youth who perceive themselves on being more empowered and confident and increasing the number of youth who have at least one stable, caring relationship with an adult or older youth mentor or peer, and increasing the number of youth who understand that substance use is harmful, and a decreased number of youth who report a favorable attitude towards substance use. So those are some of our broader short-term outcomes. And then over the course of the award, especially towards the tail end of the 3 years, maybe we're sort of dabbling into the intermediate outcomes and then the long-term outcomes. Our hope is that there really is sustained community capacity for civic engagement and organizing amongst youth and their communities. And that's why we want to make sure that young people are leading this work, and sustained policy support for continuous funding as well. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll go to the next slide. But do want to mention that the logic model is in the RFA. It's linked there, so you can go ahead and see that in a bigger format for yourself too. And then, just some examples of funded partner activities. I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but this is really a great way to look at your EYC program. What is that civic engagement program aspect of your program? How are you developing this next generation of leaders? Thinking about peer and adult, peer or adult mentorship and relationship building, and then again, the substance use prevention, education, supports, and services. So again, the logic model as well as the RFA has a handful of examples on each of these. We'll go to the next slide. So really your involvement, and really grateful for, I think the last time I saw it was over 300 folks who were on this webinar, really reaching into specific geographies across the state. We're really looking to invest, and our hope is that with the round 6 funding, we'll get to all 58 counties. I think we're just shy of 2 over the course of the EYC program, but wanting to make sure that we're investing in both urban and rural areas. So we really do appreciate all of those who are going to be applying. It is a big lift. The application is not short. So we do appreciate that, as well as your understanding of community. We're really looking for organizations who have a track record and history of working with young people, and reflect those experiences, the backgrounds, and understand the young people they're working with. You have established and trusted partnerships as well, whether your organization does both prevention work, youth-led policy work, as well as the treatment arc in-house, or whether you work across other partners to make that happen. We do understand that there is trusted partnerships with those who are on this call. And really thinking about, the approach, and successful approach really means that it's community-led and community-driven. And so we're grateful for all of those who apply for the Elevate Youth California program to understand the communities that they serve and the young people of focus in their programs, to be able to have and take a successful approach. So we don't have a prescribed prevention curriculum. We don't have a prescribed, list of activities that everyone must engage in. Of course, we have some recommendations, and then we have some minimum requirements, but many of our partners do go above those. We're really looking for organizations to propose the best approach that they think will benefit the communities and the young people they're working with. Next slide. And so we'll go into eligibility criteria. So, you have to have an office located in California. So we often get a request for a national organization. So you must have an office located in California if you are a part of a tax-exempt organization that's national. You provide services in California. Again, we mentioned earlier 501c3s, tribal organizations, including 638s and urban clinics. And again, county behavioral health organizations are eligible to apply as long as you're the sole provider of those prevention services. If you have an active award for Elevate Youth California, if it ends in December of 2024, you're eligible to apply. But if you have an award that continues on into 2025, you're ineligible to apply. As of right now, we have emailed all of the Elevate Youth California partners. We have forwarded, when the e-blast did go out, we sent a separate email saying that your organization was eligible. If you did not receive that, that means, and your award continues in 2025, you're not eligible to apply. Fiscal sponsors, I will mention, are the exemption. So if you are an entity that is a fiscal sponsor for another project or organization that doesn't have their tax exempt status, that would be the only exception. We're happy to answer any of those specific questions via email or in the Q&A if you have a question around that. Just wanting to note that also, if you're a Elevate Youth California Capacity Building Cohort 2 partner or previous Cohort 1 partner, you're only eligible to receive one Capacity Building Track award. So the only other application that you would be eligible to apply for is the standard track. So we can share more about that if you have any specific questions, but did want to note that as well. So if you are a capacity building track partner and you're thinking, okay, well, I'll just apply for the capacity building track again this year, unfortunately, you would not be eligible, as we are only allowing for an organization to have one capacity building track award. Next slide. We also are looking, as I mentioned, you probably can grasp that we're looking for organizations who have demonstrated experience partnering with young people of color and other marginalized communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, deep engagement and reflection of the proposed communities, really wanting to emphasize that again. You should be able to elaborate on the history of working with those impacted communities. And that hopefully is also represented on your board and your staff. As well, client served and your neighborhood served. And so or at least on this slide, lastly, just demonstrated evidence of inclusivity and not discriminating based on any of the factors that are noted here and others as well. Next slide. So we'll go into implementation strategies. So I mentioned or sort of highlighted this on the logic model, but really looking, so youth civic engagement is required, and then you have the ability to either select either or both mentorship, relationship building, as well as peer-led support or leadership programs. Did want to note that, the leadership development aspect of it would be incorporated throughout, even if you did not choose the peer-led support and leadership programs. Just because if youth are leading the civic engagement component, you'd have to have some of that intertwined in your program and included in your activities. But you are required in the application to select youth civic engagement. I think that automatically is selected in the application, and then you have the ability to choose either or both of mentorship, relationship building, and peer-led support and leadership programs. Next slide. The RFA also includes examples of funded activities. So direct services are included, policy systems and environmental change are included. Culturally rooted healing-centered youth civic engagement that addresses policies and systems is also a part of that. Youth-led programming and credible messenger outreach programs. The RFA has a full list of the examples that we've included. It's not exclusive just to those examples, I will note, but these are just a handful of those examples. Next slide. Award amounts, I did mention this earlier, but award amounts are up to $1 million over the course of 3 years. And so your organization would be, you can apply for up to $1 million. And I do want to just encourage and emphasize organizations as you're applying to really think about the planning phase of your application. And so really being mindful, we get a lot of applicants who, are like, on January 1st, we're just going to go ahead and everyone's, we might have to hire a new staff member, but the budget's going to include everyone on from day one. We want to be really mindful that, and we'll go into the timeline later, but I do invite folks to be mindful of the planning phase. If you're looking to hire on staff, we're estimating that award announcements will take place in December. And so if you're hiring someone with the winter holidays, be mindful of what that timeline of onboarding looks like, as well as, fully engaging or kicking off the program. So award amounts, you can apply for up to $1 million, but we do ask that you be mindful to make sure that the activities that you're proposing align with the budget that you're also requesting. We'll go to the next slide because this is probably also really helpful for folks. And if you are awarded, we do have a responsive payment schedule. There will be 4 payments. So for our current UIC partners, this is new to you all, but moving forward, we will be having, at least in round 6, 35% of your total award will be given upon execution of the subcontract and fulfilling the insurance requirements. The insurance requirements are at the very end of the RFA. And we do try to provide that to be responsive and to have less burden on funded partners to carry the financial responsibility of their award. So we try to get that as early as possible, but again, it is upon the execution of the subcontract as well as the insurance requirements. Your second payment will be made in the beginning part of year 2. So at the end of year 1, about a month later, you'll submit your second progress report as well as your second financial report. And at that time, we'll go ahead and review it. It does take anywhere from 1 to 2 months for review and payment to be processed. So early in year 2, you'll receive that second payment of 35%. And then the third payment will be provided at the end or at the beginning of year 3. So 25% of your award amount would be given at that point after both progress reports 3 and 4, as well as financial report 3 and 4 are submitted, reviewed, and approved. Key to remember that approval is necessary, so oftentimes there is back and forth. And then 5% will be at the end of the award period. So once you've submitted your last progress report as well as your last financial report and everything is good to close out, we'll provide that final 5%. And again, payment structure and timing is subject to change. For those who are awarded, we'll share more details in the subcontract as well as more information on the grantee orientation. Next slide. Other information, we do focus on urban and rural support. So at least 15% of the award will cover rural areas within California. And then, as I mentioned, the payment structure is deliverable based. So it is based on the deliverables that are being submitted. So those progress reports as well as financial reports to be submitted, reviewed, and approved. I'll also just mention for rural or urban, for rural specifically, the RFA lists the definition. So we do ask that you review that. We've defined that as sort of MSSA, the medical service study area. So population density of 250 persons or less per square mile. So again, do ask that you see that in the RFA to determine, are you working in an area that is rural, to just confirm that. Next slide. This is more details about the reporting and data requirements. As I mentioned, progress report as well as financial report. A detailed expenditure listing will also need to be provided to accompany the financial report. This means, a detailed breakdown of each of the expenses that are listed in the overall budget. The center provides training as well as technical assistance around this to be able to secure the data for both the progress report as well as the financial report and detailed expenditure listing. And so I do apologize for we previously had quarterly reports, but it is biannual reports. And so moving forward, as the timeline shows, it is biannual. So every 6 months, both the progress report as well as financial report and detailed expenditure listing, it's needed to be submitted. Again, more information will be provided about the reporting and data requirements of the award. We'll go ahead and share more of that once organizations are selected and in that grantee orientation as well as subsequent training calls. Next slide. Youth listening sessions. We do require a minimum of 1 youth listening session per year. Of project implementation. So over the course of the 3-year award, 3 youth listening sessions are required. There is a section on the work plan, which Shira will cover, that does ask about the listening sessions. This is really an opportunity to be able to receive feedback from young people. And again, your staff ideally is listening to the young people ages between 12 to 26. who are either, you know, potential to be involved in your program or involved, or just other 12 to 26-year-olds. Just really an opportunity to listen to young people and be able to receive feedback on the strategy and project implementation. Some organizations also use this to determine what policy goal they want to go ahead and implement as well. We really leave it up to each of the organizations to determine what is their plan for that and how you want to do that. I will just note that a feedback session or a youth listening session should be a standalone time that you're hearing from young people. Sometimes organizations will call these healing circles as well, but really the key component here is that young people are sharing their thoughts, their ideas, you know, they're the ones who are sharing, and it's an opportunity to be able to see how this can be brought back into your program and seeing if there's ways to shape or shift. We've had partners who have utilized it when they've had challenges of getting young people to stay involved in their programs. You know, as I mentioned, for some organizations have used it to determine their policy goal, but again, one is required each year, and we have many organizations who implement multiple. Next slide, please. And so we're going to pause there for questions. I see a handful of questions here. I'm going to go ahead and try to take just the questions that are relevant to this section. We're going to cover some of the criteria, the selection criteria later. Our funding tracks time locked. I'm not sure what this question means, but the funding tracks, the standard track does begin January 1st, 2025 and goes through December 31st, 2027. And the capacity building track currently is aimed for July 1, 2025 to December 31st, 2027. If there's more clarity that's needed, please feel free to ask a follow-up question. Okay, I'm gonna try to, okay. Can you apply for both tracks? That's another question. So yes, you can apply for both tracks. So if you, let's say if you apply for the standard track, you're not awarded, as long as you're eligible for the capacity building track, you can apply for that too. There are greater restrictions around the capacity building track. One of those restrictions are around a maximum org budget. Current or in previous rounds, that's been set at $1 million. So $1 million annual org budget of the prior year. So you would need to meet that too. When is the announcement? So in the announcement is noted on the RFA, but that we do anticipate that to be in December. Again, that's an anticipated timeline. But please note that we will have the announcement happen prior to releasing the RFA for the capacity building track. So the announcements will happen for the standard track, and then following that, the release of the capacity building track will happen. I will just note that I noticed this is a familiar name as a partner who is currently awarded, so you would be ineligible to apply for the capacity building track if you already have a previous Elevate Youth California award. So I just did want to mention that as a reminder. Age group of 12 to 26, we are increasingly serving middle school students, some whom are 11 years old. Majority are still 12 plus, but we would like to, but would we be able to include 11-year-old youth as well? Yes, you would be able to include 11-year-olds as well in your program, as there is a family engagement component, but please note that the priority age is 12 to 26. So as you're determining the number of youth that are impacted through the program, we do ask that you be explicit on the number of young people between the ages of 12 to 26 and those that are 11. The good thing is that after when you're 11, you're going to turn 12, and this is a 3-year award. And so over the course of the award, they will be within the priority age range. So that is just something to note as well. But we do ask that you are transparent in your application to make note of that. Is the main focus primarily focused on the war on drugs? The priority population is so communities of color, Black, Indigenous, Native youth, and those communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs are a priority population. Given that this funding is from the Cannabis Tax Fund, we want to be mindful of the disproportionate impact that the communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs have had. And this is really an opportunity to be able to reinvest in those communities. And we want to make sure that we are prioritizing those communities. Another a question, and this is hopping around, if we are a nonprofit with multiple offices and we have an active award in one location, would we be eligible to apply for a different region? This is a really great question. So if you have one tax exempt ID and you are not operating as a fiscal sponsorship, you are only able to have one active Elevate Youth California award. Again, the only exception for this are organizations that operate as fiscal sponsorships for multiple projects or organizations or entities that don't have tax exempt status. But if you have just one tax exempt ID and all of the regions and all of your locations or offices are operating under that without a fiscal sponsorship model, you would not be eligible. Does each nonprofit have to apply individually, or can a few apply together? This is a great question. So coalitions are able to apply. So coalitions, collaboratives are eligible to apply, and you would just submit one application. Another question, how many awards are anticipated to be made? This is a great question. We do not know the exact number. I believe it was just a little bit over $40 million. I want to say it was $43 million that is anticipated to be awarded at this time. That may change. It all depends on what the actual actuals from the budget were for the California state budget for the cannabis tax fund. And so right now with $43 million, I would say it's a good estimate that at least 50 awards will be made. However, it'll just depend on the number of dollars that each organization is awarded, whether many organizations apply for less than $1 million or if everyone is applying for that and they're awarded that amount. But I would say a good safe bet is a minimum of 50 applications are likely to be made at this time with what we know. Do you know of any great organizations that help develop logic models? We do have a few folks that we know in evaluation that develop logic models. Not required for the program, but if you wanted to go ahead and, this is also a funded partner, so if you wanted to go ahead and email us, we'll go ahead and put you in touch around that. But logic models are not required. We have that just to show just transparency around what the program looks like for the activities, the inputs, the outputs look like for EYC. And we found that logic models to be really helpful for folks to understand greater programmatic design. Okay, for round 6, is there a specific focus, issue area, et cetera, where certain proposals will be prioritized with available funding? No, there are not specific focus areas or issue areas that we look to fund. That really depends on the proposals. I will mention that the policy goals, like for example, if let's say if we get applicants who are proposing the same policy goal, they're not within the same region, that doesn't determine, do we focus on one priority or policy goal over another? We do look for geographic spread as well as various demographics that are reached within the overall awards, but focus area typically isn't a primary factor into final decisions. Do we have to have a physical office in California or just provide services? The eligibility requirements do state that you have to have a physical office and provide services in California. So it is both. So you must have a physical office in California as well as previously provide services in California as well. Or organizations that work virtually but exclusively in California eligible. We don't have a physical office, but we do our work. I invite you to go ahead and send us an email. If you are an organization that works virtually, we'd like to understand more. I don't want to say no just because we do have in the eligibility, or I don't want to say yes or no just because in the eligibility we do require an office. However, we do know that sometimes folks are working virtually. However, I will just mention that in-person services are highly favored. Given the reach of young people and working with the population age of 12 to 26, as well as that policy systems and environmental change work. Given that in-person work will be required to speak to, and meet with elected officials and all of that, as well as any of the policy work that there is in-person work that needs to be happening, that does play a factor into the programmatic design. The RFA indicates that fiscal sponsorships are available. So if we are 501c4 but have a fiscal lead that is a 501c3, would we be eligible to apply? It's a great question. I don't think we've had this happen in the past. I do ask that you send us an email to elevateyouthca@shfcenter.org, and we can clarify more about that. You mentioned for organizations who are looking for a track record, history of working with people, but are also looking for the best approach to engage the youth through the logic model. What is the likelihood of an organization can actually compete if we don't have a track record and we are a new organization? This is a great question. We are looking for that track record. And so if you're a new organization, oftentimes the staff have prior experience. I do want to note that often does support some of the work, but even for the organization, for an award of $1 million, the organization to be competitive must be established. And so I'm happy to take, this might be a better question for an office hours. I can't say how you can actually compete, because it all depends on what the number of applications are and what that looks like, and as well as the geographic spread. So there's a number of factors that come into that. But I will mention that for the Standard Truck Award, typically organizations have been established and they're not relatively new. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause there, keeping in mind the timing. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Shira. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to answer many of the questions over the Q&A box. But I'm going to pass it over to Shira so we can get through the remaining materials.
Thank you. And we certainly appreciate receiving your questions, and we encourage you to continue to use the Q&A feature in Zoom to do so. We can go to the next slide. So at this time, we will review the application process. The direct link to the application can be found on page 16 of the RFA. Again, the RFA is located on our website homepage and also in the news section of our website. And then we'll drop the direct link to the application for your reference into the chat. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So first, we'll walk you through using the center's grants portal, and this is where applicants fill out and submit an application. And then I'll go over the contents of the application itself and cover the application attachments. Our application process is through an online grants portal. Here you can see a screenshot of the login page for the portal. If for some reason your organization does not have the technology to access the grants portal, please contact us and then we'll work on you with another submission method. Also, as previously stated, the link on the screen will take you to the direct request for application, or the direct application. As it relates to online browsers, if you are working on a PC, you are encouraged to use Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge as your web browser of choice. If you're working on a Mac, feel free to use Safari. The application is also accessible through Google Chrome. Please note that the portal does not provide an option to create an account, but you can save your progress and resume later, and momentarily we'll show you how to do this. The landing page of the application does start with encouragement to read the RFA in its entirety, including the guidelines and instructions. So again, we encourage you to do so. And we encourage you to do this before actually jumping into the application. And then please also note that if your application has a fiscal sponsor, you will indicate this on this first page by selecting yes, and if not, you will select no. We can go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay. So right away at the top, you'll see that you will have an option. Maybe we skipped a slide. Can we go to the previous slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so here you do have an option to save your progress and resume later. So we just want to highlight that and to call that out. And we can go to the next slide. Okay, so the application will begin by asking for some basic applicant information. So it's here that you'll share the name of the organization, where you're located, this basic contact information as well. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so next you'll be prompted to include contact information for the CEO or director of the organization. You will also have the option to include an additional or primary application contact. So this is the person that will be contacted for questions regarding the application submission. As you can see on the screen, you also have two additional contacts that you can provide, and that's the financial officer and or a contract administrator. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So next you will provide a project description, and you'll tell us about your implementation strategy. So we'll ask that you give your project a name, and you'll provide a brief purpose statement, and we ask that you begin the statement with the word "to." Also, you will provide the amount requested, and this is a reminder to ensure that the amount requested also matches what is presented in the organization budget that is submitted. Next, you'll also tell us about the implementation strategies. Please note that youth activism for policy systems or environmental change is a required implementation strategy for this particular funding opportunity, and this is a civic engagement aspect of your project. Also noting that you must select at least 2 implementation strategies. Now, for implementation strategy, you will be asked to provide more information on that later, and particularly in the work plan that will be submitted, and we'll cover that shortly. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. Next, you'll be asked to share information on project geography. And so this represents where services will be delivered and the corresponding percentages. In the section, the total geography percentage must equal 100. Just as an example, say you're located in Alameda County, all of your services will take place with young people in Alameda County. You would simply enter 100 in the Alameda box. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So next, the application asks you to indicate if services will be implemented in an urban, rural, or both settings. So guidance and definitions on this may be found in the RFA. And just like the geography section, the race and ethnicity section must total 100. At the bottom of the section, when you're in the application itself, you can kind of scroll down to the bottom of that section, and then you'll see that there is a grand total that will present. And just again, noting that this refers to the individuals that will be reached and served by the proposed EYC project. We can go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So as in previous sections, age group must total 100%. And again, this was addressed earlier in a question that was presented, but just noting that all selected activities must be related to youth 12 to 26 years of age. But also just want to reflect back on the question that was answered previously for additional guidance. Also, in this area, you will be able to indicate if you have any additional special populations or populations of focus that the project will serve. You can see them listed here, and we just ask that you select all that are applicable. So don't just select everything. Make sure that it's applicable to the individuals that you are serving, and that your project will be tailored to these areas of focus that are selected. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the area of the application where you share more about your board and staff. So it's here that you will share the racial ethnic makeup group of the board and staff. And then also, if you are applying as a county agency, this should reflect the makeup of the staff and leadership who will work directly on the proposed EYC program. Also noting that if you are submitting from a county agency, to contact us just to confirm your eligibility. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. So the application has roughly 10 required narrative questions. The full questions can be found in the RFA, but on your screen, you can get a sense and an idea of the type of question topics that are presented. So you'll be sharing more on your organization, the population that'll be reached, how your project will be culturally and linguistically appropriate and examples of that, as well as information on your project team. You'll also share information on track record with social justice youth development as well as activities. Also, you'll share more on the organizational track record with substance use disorder prevention work. There's a question around substance use disorder prevention activities, as well as monitoring and evaluation and technical assistance. And it's here where you share how we will be able to support you through the award period if awarded. Also, just a reminder to familiarize yourself with some of the terms that appear in the glossary and that were presented earlier in the presentation as it relates to substance use prevention as well as social justice youth development. Also, due to the nature of the online portal and to avoid any technical difficulties, we do recommend that you type out the responses to the project narrative questions on a Word document first, and then copy and paste it into the application portal when you are ready to submit. So this also comes in handy if you have multiple people contributing to this section of the application. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so next we are going to dive into the required attachments for the application. And so we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So in the attachments tab of the application, so this will be towards the end of the application, you will see places where you can upload specific documents. And so these documents are required to submit at the time of your application. And so these documents are a proposed 3-year project budget and justification, a work plan, the applicant organization's signed W-9, and then also a letter of support. And so this letter of support should be signed should be from an administrator or executive of the organization. And if you are applying as a coalition, the support letter should be signed by each coalition member, stating their role in the project and signed by that organization's executive. If the application includes a fiscal sponsor, a signed letter from the fiscal sponsor's executive and a copy of the MOU is required. The support letter should affirm the applicant's ability to submit quarterly, or biannual data and financial progress reports, and then also affirm participation in external evaluation activities and participation at 2 in-person convenings. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so continuing on the topic of attachment. So this screenshot is slightly different than the one that appears in the application. But as shared before, the attachment section will appear towards the end of the application, and it will also contain this note that I do want to read, as it is important, that grant applications will not be accepted if requested attachments are not included or completed. Also, please upload your file only once for each requirement. So as you are uploading, make sure that you have the correct files. So please do your double checks. And then at the top of the attachment section, you will be able to download the following attachments. So just restating that there is a proposed 3-year project budget and budget justification template that you will download, complete, and upload to the application. Also a work plan template, a fillable W-9 form. And then there's also a work plan example, which I will share a screenshot in just momentarily. When you're ready to upload your files, you want to click choose file. You can see it there in the purple boxes. Locate the file on your computer and upload to the application. Okay, we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here is a snapshot of the proposed project budget template. As stated before, you will download the form and you will complete the provided form. So we are also sharing and we're requesting that you not use your own template, but that you use a template that is provided with the application, and that you take time to familiarize yourself with this template, just noting that there are 3 main sections in the budget. There's a section for personnel, consultant fees, and then also other expenses, including miscellaneous. Also noting that column G reflects year 1 of the grant, column H is for year 2, column I is year 3, and then as you can see on the far right-hand side of the screen, that's actually column J, and that reflects the total project budget over the course of 3 years. And also noting that the amount requested must not exceed 1 million. Also, we want to highlight that indirect costs will automatically populate. And so you can see this towards the bottom of the form. However, you can manually adjust this amount. And we also just want to reiterate that direct costs may not exceed 20% of the amount requested. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this slide is highlighting the budget justification. So in addition to a budget, a justification is required. This is a part of the budget download found in the application. In your budget justification, describe each line in detail. For example, if you're requesting funds for travel, please describe who will travel, where and for what purpose, and how you arrived at the requested amount. You may also include the number of trips and the number of staff that might be traveling. And another example would be staff and consultants. So if you are utilizing staff and consultants, you would want to provide a brief description of that person's responsibility with the project. And so it gives us an idea of their salary and their key responsibilities. Please also include details for all line items. You may also share about in-kind contributions. And one thing that we definitely want to highlight is to be sure to include FTE for any of the staff that are included on the budget. That lets us know how much time will be allocated to the project. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, here's a snapshot of the budget justification. Here you will provide a brief narrative on each of the line items as requested just previously. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay. A work plan is also required for this funding opportunity. And here with these bullets, this just gives you an idea of the information that's being requested. Okay, we can go to the next slide, which should actually be a screenshot. Okay, so you can see here that, the work plan starts with some basic information, organization name, the award period, the priority population, the number of youth being served. It will ask for an overall project goal and ask that you create objectives that will support that project goal, as well as the number of young people to be reached, implementation strategies, and specific activities that will lead to the attainment of those objectives and the overarching project goal. There is another section of the work plan that asks specifically about their civic engagement aspect of the work, and a goal will need to be created for that with supporting objectives and activities. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have landed on our question slide, and I know that some of the questions have been answered via the Q&A function, but we'll pause just to see if there are a few more that can be highlighted at this time.
Sure, let's actually go through and continue on because I'm just noting time. It is 11:16, so if we just close out and then let's come back to questions at the very end, just so that way we make sure we cover all of the materials and reminders, and then we'll come back to questions.
Okay, that sounds great. So this next section is going to focus in on how to be competitive. So we want to share some tips for you before we close out. So along with the eligibility criteria that was discussed previously, here are a few things that will be considered. So the center will select applicants who present the most complete and responsive application, demonstrating the most favorable mix of credentials, potential, and also cost. Applications will be judged on the overall likelihood of impact, strength of implementation team, the proposal itself and budget. We're hoping that your application will describe why your organization is the most optimum organization to run a youth substance use disorder prevention project, highlighting past and even current successes, and your experience connecting with communities that have been harmed by the war on drugs. Also, we hope to see use of a culturally responsive intervention for substance use prevention, simultaneously grasping the way in demonstrated understanding of the way that trauma informs how youth developed. Also, applicants should show an equity framework that considers the necessity for program activities and outcomes to advance health and racial equity. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Also, competitive applications will demonstrate a commitment to social justice youth development with an asset-based approach to working with youth. Competitive applications will have a complete youth engagement plan that's responsive to community needs. A use of prevention and education that is customized and that uses a stigma reducing method. Also, applications will utilize an intersectional approach to health equity and health equity as it relates to policy systems and environmental change. Applications that are competitive will put in a clear and proven screening and referral network that can connect to youth and connect them with higher level of support if needed. And then overall, the application should demonstrate the ability through staffing, through program strategies and approaches to provide comprehensive prevention, education, and early intervention support for youth substance use disorder in a way that is culturally responsive, linguistically appropriate, and reflects the community that will be served. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so just have a few proposal writing tips for you. Again, as we've said several times, we are encouraging you to read the request for applications in its entirety and to be sure to follow those application guidelines and instructions. If you have any question regarding eligibility, we encourage you to reach out to us as soon as possible through our email to get those questions answered. Also, we're asking that you answer questions clearly and provide enough detail about the proposed activities so that the reviewers can fully understand your plan. And sometimes we share a tip to have someone else even read what you have written to ensure that someone who just picks up your proposal can understand what you're putting forth. And also clearly explain your proposed project and the change that will result as it relates to the organization implementing that proposed project. We can go to the next slide, please. Again, we're asking that you check for consistency with the project description, consistency with the submitted budget, the budget narrative, your narrative responses, and the work plan. So just be sure that your application is cohesive and that there is consistency. As I mentioned, have someone who's not involved in your project read the application, and then also review the application checklist to ensure that you have all of the required documents. We can go to the next slide, please. As a tip, you do have the option to save your progress and resume later. We encourage you to submit the application before the deadline. If you run into any technical difficulties, please reach out to our team as soon as possible and we will assist you. Also, we encourage you to write out responses to your narrative questions outside of the grants portal, and then you can copy and paste your responses into the application once you're ready. Also, be sure to track your word count. So each of the narrative questions has a word maximum. There's a word counter in the application that you must adhere to. So just be mindful of that as well. We can go to the next slide. Okay. More reminders to review the application instructions and criteria. Reminder that coalitions may apply as long as one eligible organization is the applicant. Here you can see the required attachments again, as well as a note about the application question. So be sure to submit that project budget and justification, work plan, W-9, and letter of support. We can go to the next slide, which will cover our timeline. So the application deadline is September 23rd at 1 p.m. So that is a firm deadline. And as shared before, if you experience any technical difficulties, please reach out to our team. We anticipate award notifications happening in December 2024, with funds being made available January 2025. So funds will be made available once the subcontract is executed and insurance requirements are fulfilled. So we definitely want to highlight that, and encourage you to review the RFA to familiarize yourself with the insurance requirements if your organization is funded. Let's see, we can go to the next slide. So we have another webinar, which will be Wednesday, September 4th. So that's coming up next week. This webinar will be a repeat of the information that was shared today. So you are certainly welcome to join that webinar if it would be helpful for you. And we also have office hours. On the next slide, we'll have our office hour dates as well as the times. And these are also located within the request for application. So we certainly encourage you to take advantage of these this opportunity to be able to ask questions about the funding opportunity, as well as any questions that might be unique to your situation. So please save the date for that. And last but not least, we have contacts and resources. So we ask that if you have any questions, or maybe your question wasn't answered today just due to the constraint of time, we ask that you reach out to us at elevateuca@shfcenter.org. And then also there are a few resources listed here on the screen. These resources are also available within the RFA. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pause, and then I think we have time for just a few questions before we close out.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shira. We'll go back to just the questions tab. Actually, we'll leave it here. We'll leave it here for just the resources. I want to address a broad question that's been asked, which has been mostly around what's eligible. We've gotten a few questions that have come in around, would arts activities, when we talk about prevention, are we talking about substance use, just some greater clarity around that. And so I will just want to note that it is important for you, as Shira mentioned, as an applicant, to make sure your application is standalone. Knowing that this is a substance use disorder prevention program that is centered in social justice youth development, it is important for applicants to be able to draw back and to tie back their activities, their proposed activities, their proposed program, their proposed policy goal back to prevention. And that is why we spent quite a bit of time at the very beginning talking about prevention, really being rooted in addressing risk factors, promoting protective factors, really thinking about the needs of the community. So it is important for, and you probably have seen some of the responses. We're still getting through the questions in the Q&A, but you may have seen some of the responses being to tie it back into prevention. And so it is important that that applicants do tie back their application back to prevention. It is quite important that you be able to tie that back. And so when, again, just revisiting the definition of prevention in the RFA, if your activities or your goals are around resources, again, how does that connect back to substance use disorder prevention? Arts and healings activities, how do you draw that back into increasing protective factors, reducing the risk factors of the young people that you're working with? So just really wanted to highlight that. There are some questions about eligibility. We've identified that. Will mentioned 501c3 threes are eligible as long as they are a community-based organization. There's a question in the chat around a private foundation. I would really recommend you email elevateuca@shfcenter.org to get some more clarity around that. Is there a minimum award amount that an organization can apply to? No, there is a maximum of $1 million. There's actually, this reminds me of another question that was asked quite a bit, which is, you know, are organizations awarded or countered, or are they awarded an amount smaller versus denied? We've seen both. We have awarded applicants in the past. We have modified or adjusted the recommended award amount, as well as denied applicants. I cannot also emphasize enough the need to ensure that your budget, your programmatic activities, and your policy goal are realistic. You know, it is important to ensure that your budget aligns and is justified by the proposed activities that you are presenting. So as Shira mentioned, there is a justification portion as part of the budget. It's on the second tab on that template. It is important for you to describe, you know, the rate at which, you know, incentives, for example, are going to be provided. If you have travel, where are you looking to travel? What are some of those estimates? How are you coming up to that amount? We have seen applicants who have requested the full award amount of $1 million and have been, you know, as I mentioned earlier, either recommended a lower award amount or have been denied. What I will say, the strongest applicants will make sure that there is alignment between the proposed activities as well as the requested budget. So I did want to mention that as well. There's another, you know, for returning applicants, so for, you know, for EYC funded partners who had a previous award, would you encourage continuation of the same policy advocacy focus, or are you encouraging a new policy system change focus? We don't have a specific request on this. It's really up to the organization. For example, if your previous goal was achieved, you know, at that point it would probably be expected that you're shifting your goal, but it really is up to the organization. We're not requiring, and this goes for new applicants as well as returning EYC applicants. You know, we are not requesting for new activities to take place. So this can be, of course, within your existing activities, but again, being able to elaborate on how are you expanding that? Is the program, you know, reach increasing, or there are some adjustments being made with the requested funds that are happening? We'll take another few questions, and actually we're going to stay on a little bit longer just to get through some of these questions. I'm going to just start from here. Could we use funds to do health fair outreach? Really encourage folks to go ahead and read the RFA. Again, being able to tie in your requests or your proposed activities to prevention, you know, throughout the county and our schools. There's another question that was, you know, we're at 501c3. Are we eligible to do activities at the schools? Yes, you can work with school sites. You know, that is allowed. A handful of funded partners reach young people where they're at, and where are young people between the ages of 12 to 18, they're in school. You know, so that is allowed as well. Do encourage you to read the RFA for the unallowable activity or the unallowable costs that has a specific list. But if there's any specific questions, you're more than welcome to email us too. If you applied for Cohort 5 standard track but were not awarded, would you use the same portal account? So unfortunately, there is no specific portal. There is a link which has been shared in the chat and is on the RFA as well. We do ask that folks go ahead and click that link. You won't be able to save past or you won't be able to pull up past responses into that. You would need to submit a new application. For the office hours and contact resource link, I don't know if my team may have dropped this in, but if not, it's at the bottom of the, oh, they did drop it in. It is also in the RFA as well. RFA asks to be specific about policy systems and environmental change. Oh, I did answer this question, but I think it got moved over to the answered column. How do we name the policy goal at this point, giving youth input? So the example of the work plan does note this, but again, if you are looking to go ahead and propose that young people are going to identify your policy goal once you've been awarded, it is important for you to go ahead and list the activities that will take place, because you'll have to have activities with those young people to determine what that policy goal would be. So you're more than welcome to go ahead and list that. And we do ask that you list a potential goal, but then just make note of it that this is what a potential goal could look like. But we really want to work with young people to determine that. So, you know, to be fine, adding in a potential goal, and then, to be finalized with the activities described below. I cannot emphasize this enough. It is really, really important to make sure that your narrative and the proposed activities that you're describing in the narrative, your work plan and your budget aligned. I know Shira mentioned this, but it is really important that you utilize the work plan template to go into detail to describe the activities that are going to take place. So the narrative, you might not be able to describe how frequently you're meeting with young people. Are you meeting with young people 3 times a week? Are you meeting with them once a week? Over the course of how long are you meeting them? That's a great place to include that also in the work plan as well. It is important to be very specific. So really revisiting the SMART acronym as well. Do we need to have a community partner for the 6th round of funding? Based off of what I'm understanding this question, no. You don't need to have a community partner. There was a previous question that asked about referrals and linkages. Because this program does not fund treatment, it is very common actually that our funded partners have mentioned needing to be able to provide referrals or linkages for the young people that they're working with. And so, just wanting to mention that, because treatment isn't an allowable cost, either if your organization provides those services, you're able to link them to other resources within your organization or to other services outside of that. There's another question in the chat about what is the maximum stipend amount. We do not have a maximum stipend amount. We ask that or stipend criteria, this is up to the organization. Again, we do ask that you are mindful of this and you set that criteria up. So in the budget justification, if you have incentives for young people, or in this case, this applicant or this individual is also asking about volunteers, we ask that you are mindful of including those details. So what is that criteria for young people to be able to receive their incentive? Are they participating in 80% of the activities? Are they going ahead and being a part of an internship program and seeing that through completion over the course of 9 months? Needing to be very specific in that realm. So I answered. Okay, so handful of questions. The webinar is being recorded and will be available. It'll be posted to our website very likely by the end of this week, if not early next week. I would say give us till early next week. We just need to make sure that we add captions for accessibility, and the resources are also remediated for accessibility, so it does take a little while. Are staff allowed to work remotely in California with normal daily interaction in person with youth on school campuses? Yes, I'm a little unclear about work remotely. So my guess is that this might be an organization where their staff work remotely, but then do work in person with the young people. That's allowed. We don't have any requirement that staff have to go into an office, but to ensure that the organization does have active work and track record in California, we do require that office in California. Do you have to show different activities, work plans for different age groups, 12 versus 26? It's a great question. No, you only are able to submit one work plan. However, it is very likely that the activities that you propose for 12-year-olds will look different than the activities proposed for 26-year-olds. So it is important that if you are engaging in young people across that entire age range, that you do list if the activities will be different. So I know earlier someone mentioned working with middle school students. If you work with high school students and college students, or young adults, those activities would be different because the young adults would not be meeting you at the school site, for example. So again, it is important for you. We don't require a separate work plan. It should be incorporated within the single attachment work plan template that you are submitting. On the application with 2 applicants, do we include all of this information? So this is an example of what we would consider a collaborative application or coalition. And so there would be a primary application that is being submitted, or there's a primary organization leading this work. And the narrative section is very short. So it is up to the sort of group to determine how they want to go about that. For the board information, general information, it would be of the one entity who's the lead application, or applicant. So just wanting to note that the general information would be for the lead applicant. The narrative section can include some of that information, but again, you might be limited given the word account. Here's another question. Just to clarify, we ask for 900K. Is that per year or split into the 300K per year for 3 years? So this is a great question. The maximum award amount is $1 million over 3 years, which means that it cannot be more than a total award budget. The budget template would ask that you split the budget up by year. So you would be able to answer that question on how your budget is split, but the maximum award amount is $1 million over the 3 years, not per each of those 3 years. Can you submit an application that covers several geographic areas? Yes, you can submit an application that includes multiple counties. Again, you should be able to show the track record in each of those counties as well. Can you upload an existing W-9, or do we need to complete the fillable PDF on the portal? We do encourage you to go ahead and include the PDF on the portal. Sometimes organizations have an outdated W-9, so I'd say just to be able to best support your application, that's an easy way to go. But let's say you're at the end of it and you didn't have someone sign off on it. You can submit that. And if we need an updated version, we would request that. Is technical assistance provided by Elevate or by third-party vendors? Technical assistance upon being awarded would be provided by both the center and the Elevate Youth California team, as well as other partners that we collaborate with to be able to provide technical assistance on various topics. So it's a combination of both. Do you have to have substance use disorder prevention track record? Yes, you have to have a track record related to prevention, as well as social justice youth development. Again, when folks are reading this, if you haven't engaged in substance use disorder prevention specific work, you might be like, well, my organization doesn't talk about substances. Again, this is prevention. So really encourage you to read the RFAID for that definition again, and being able to draw back in, if your organization is working with young people and you have been addressing addressing risk factors, promoting protective factors, that is prevention. So you would need to be able to describe that. So it is very, very important for every applicant to be able to describe how their proposed activities as well as their track record relate back to prevention. As Shira mentioned earlier, please see this as a standalone application. We don't ask subsequent questions for follow-up. So what we read in your narrative and the supplemental attachments is what we review the application with, and it is the applicant's responsibility to ensure they are tying back their proposed activities, their track record, back to substance use disorder prevention, as well as social justice youth development. If the proposal is being submitted by several partners, should the statistics for ethnic racial backgrounds be for just the primary applicant or for all partner groups? This is a really good question again. So I would really encourage that, for the racial ethnic background, if you're applying as a coalition, you can submit that specific area as across the coalition. But the rest of the information is important that it is for the lead agency because it is more technical information, the address, all of that information. This is only if it is truly as a coalition or collaborative. If you are planning to partner with potential organizations or partners and you have not determined them, it should only be for the statistics should only be for your organization that's implementing the program. You can also describe this, if you wanted to go ahead and choose to only have it for the lead applicant and be able to describe the breakdown in the narrative section, you're able to describe that too. Please note that if you have partners or if it's a collaborative or coalition, each of those organizations, you would describe some of the cultural and linguistically appropriate services throughout the narrative as well. We answered the question around for return applicants. Would you encourage continuous or same policy advocacy focus? That is totally up to the organization. We do not have any requirements or recommendations. Really ask for funded partners to determine if they would like to expand on the programs that they've been implementing or administer new programs or policy goals. Okay, I'm gonna try to get to a few more just to be able to try to get clarify any of the questions so that we're making sure folks have what they need before the next proposers conference. Is there a certain allocation of awards for current funded partners versus new applicants? No, there is not. We do not. We do not have any sort of preference or allocation set aside. All of the applications would be reviewed as the sole application. And so we do not have any allocation for previous partners. It is really important, again, to be very clear and concise in your application. To ensure you're describing the activities, the track record, all of that, all of the information that's necessary. Can the required insurance be in the budget as a program cost, or does it need to be covered through the indirect costs? I answered this question over the chat, but it is up to the organization on how they want to include insurance. What I would make note of just broadly is that it is important for you to be able to determine what is a direct cost and what is an indirect cost. Many of the insurance requirements through the Elevate Youth California program may be applicable to other programs or awards as well. And in that case, you know, that would be seen more as an indirect cost because it would be covered as a portion of it. We have seen applicants as well as funded partners list that as a direct cost. But again, it's important for you to be mindful of the specific allocation being reasonable for your EYC award. So for example, if there's a new insurance requirement that your organization does not currently have or would not need for another program, but the Elevate Youth California program requires it, that could be seen as a direct cost. Or your organization might determine that this is more of an indirect cost. We're just going to go ahead and lump it into our indirect cost requests that we have. So we don't have a preference, but your finance team might. If we submit the proposal at one funding level, will you modify it or as needed, or can we submit the proposal at multiple funding levels? I'm guessing this is referring to the requested amount. You know, again, I'm going to just emphasize, I think this was asked prior, but again, just emphasizing again, the need to make sure there's alignment in the proposed activity and the requested budget. We have seen applications that have been awarded a smaller award amount. So the recommended amount or the award amount was lower than what was requested. And we have also seen applications be denied because there is an alignment in the budget and the activities. So again, there isn't like a, you know, if we just go ahead and go for the higher amount, you know, again, we really want you to be mindful of the amount that you're requesting. Is there a target number of youth served within this 3-year funding? No, there is not a target number of youth served with this with the 3-year funding. It is really important for organizations to determine what is that reach. And this will look different. Sometimes organizations work with a smaller group of young people at a more frequent rate. So they might meet with young people 3 times a week, you know, over the course of 9 months. And then they have, you know, various cohorts, or they continue to work with them over 3 times a week over the course of 3 years, where others might engage with a higher number of young people less frequently. So this really depends on the proposed activities that you're submitting. Okay, I did answer this question. Let's see. Oh, how should an organization's current budget inform the amount requested? Is there an amount that would be considered too much per the org's current budget? This is a really great question. So, you know, I would really encourage organizations who have smaller budgets. So let's say if you're an organization that has less than, I'm going to go ahead and go with, let's say if you're an organization that has less than $300,000 a year budget, and you're going ahead and you're applying for this award, you know, I would be mindful of, you know, if you're requesting $1 million, that's $333,000 per year. That is nearly doubling your organizational budget. I won't say it hasn't been done. because it has, but you know, just being mindful around what your organization's capacity is for implementing that. And actually, this goes for all organizations, not just small organizations. This also goes for larger organizations. It is really important for you to your organization to request a reasonable amount and propose activities that are realistic within the 3-year time frame. You know, again, I mentioned earlier, being mindful of the planning phase, what it's going to take for you to plan, hire on staff if you need to, and to be able to begin the implementation of the program. We see many applications who say on day one, on January 1st, they're going to go ahead and do all these things. But again, it is important for you to be able to be mindful of what that looks like. We want you to be realistic. We don't want to overburden partners, you know, and have you propose unreasonable activities. We'd rather you be mindful of what that startup time frame is going to look like, as well as thinking about a budget and that's going to be reasonable for you to spend down. There are no cost extensions. So, you know, we do anticipate the closure of the award to happen on December 31st, 2027. And I will tell you, and many of our funded partners can probably tell you, the 3 years do fly by. There's another question about, does the applicant retain ownership of the data and products produced under the project? This is a really great question. So I think there are some clauses within our subcontract, and we're happy to share those if you're awarded, you know, around that. However, you know, the curriculum, if you know your organization develops curriculum under this program or activities, or you have data that you're submitting, while we utilize that data for our aggregated reports, you know, that would be technically still owned by your organization. There are some stipulations, and again, I'm happy if you want to go ahead and send us an email, we're happy to send you over our subcontract language on this. It's just there's some general language that is there. Okay, I think, Shira, we got to all of the questions. I don't know if you see any others.
I think we worked our way through the Q&A and chat.
Okay.
Grateful to see so many folks still on and took the opportunity to hear that information. Thank you.
Oh, and there's a few more coming in. So is food an eligible expense? Yes, food is an eligible expense in the program. Oh, that's been asked a few times. So food is an eligible expense. And I know a member of our team also answered that question. And then, yep, our team has also answered more questions in the chat as well. Please note that we will also have a frequently asked questions document. So any of the questions that were asked, you know, multiple times, we'll have the answers and responses available on that document as well. You're more than welcome. Let's say if we go back to the slide for the next proposers conference, that is next Tuesday, or next week, sorry, next Wednesday. And so if you have any questions related to your application before then, you're more than welcome to email us at the Elevate Youth ca@shfcenter.org email address. We're happy to answer any questions directly via email there. You can catch us on the webinar next week. And then if we go to the next slide, as just a follow-up, we'll have the office hours. The office hours are really a great time to ask specific questions. It'll be in a meeting format, so it won't be webinar style. And so on those calls, we'll literally just open it up and you'll have an opportunity to answer questions along with all the other folks that are there. And we'll answer as many of those questions as we can in each of those sections. Please note that in the office hours, we will not review any responses. We do not review application materials, but if you have, we do ask that you bring specific questions related to your application. And I will take one or just a few last questions. I think there's just really one. Oh, and I missed it now. Okay. We are a social justice youth organizing org and want to partner with an org to provide prevention services. Will this be acceptable even though we haven't directly addressed drug prevention in the past? Yeah, you would be able to partner with another organization that's not that is allowable under this award. I really want to emphasize when folks say that we haven't done or haven't addressed drug prevention in the past. I'm going to go ahead and put my same little spiel back on of, really ask that you revisit the prevention definition. I can assure that many organizations, if not all, who work with young people to address their needs, that provide resources to empower, skill up, work with young people, you are doing some aspects of prevention. Whether you consider that to be substance use disorder prevention, that might be different, but anytime working with young people to address risk factors, promote protective factors, you are. But this isn't a good example of an organization. I'm going to take it as an organization who may not be well versed in talking about substance use disorder prevention. You wanted to go ahead and partner, that would be definitely an allowable allowable cost, and it might also strengthen your application, of just being clear. So I do ask that folks revisit the definition of prevention, and I also it also is great to be reflective on where your organization's strengths are too. So if your organization has worked with the other piece that we do often get a lot is organizations who have worked with young people, and maybe they are working more around prevention, but they haven't done the policy systems work. Being mindful of where your strengths are, where your organization or your application might benefit from partnering with an organization who is very well versed in social justice youth development. So do invite folks to think about that. And then I can't say it enough, making sure that your application for the policy systems and environmental change goal is really youth-led. It is really critical to make sure that that is youth-led and ensure that your application, your work plan really reflects that. Okay. That's the last question we'll take for today. It seems like there's no other questions. Really thank everyone and for staying on over about 23 minutes over, and we'll get to any other questions via email, or we'll see you next week or during one of the office hours. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.